I welcome everyone to today's hearing, which explores the important topic of excess corporate price hikes and their role in helping to drive inflation. I now recognize myself for an opening statement. As CBS News reported earlier this year, Selena Flores, a resident of Southwest Florida, used to be able to provide her family of four with balanced meals that included meat at most dinners. But when grocery prices nearly doubled, the Flores' diet then transitioned to meat only 2 or 3 days a week. At the same time, the Flores family was struggling to keep up with record meat prices. America's 4 largest meat processing companies saw their profits surge 134% from nearly $4 billion in 2019 to nearly $9 billion in 2021. In the first half of 2022 alone, their combined profits totaled $2.5 billion, almost a 100% increase over the first half of 2019. Ms. Flores' story and the stories of others like her who are struggling to feed their families, afford insulin, or purchase gas is why we are here. Since early 2021, Americans have been suffering from rising prices caused primarily by global supply chain disruptions and changing demand patterns due to the pandemic. Even combined with traditional supply and demand factors, however, these elements are insufficient to totally explain why inflation remains elevated. Some would have you believe the American Rescue Plan is the primary factor driving inflation. Those critics, however, cannot explain how the ARP somehow caused inflation to soar in other countries around the world. For example, the UK is currently experiencing 20% more inflation than the United States, but the ARP did not exist there. The EU is collectively experiencing 22% more inflation than the United States, but the ARP did not exist in any of the Eurozone countries. And Turkey is experiencing over 900% more inflation than the US, but the ARP did not exist there either. Additionally, nonpartisan economists at Moody's Analytics and elsewhere have credited the ARP with preventing another recession that occurred during the Trump years, and instead created as many as 4 million jobs in 2021. There are, however, other factors that contribute to inflation that have not received enough attention. One of those factors is extreme price hikes. In other words, companies raising prices far more than required to offset higher costs, even when accounting for shifts in supply and demand, resulting in the highest profit margins we have ever seen in the last 70 years. Americans outside the halls of Congress recognize the importance of this issue. In a poll that Navigator Research released in late July, a whopping 80% majority of Americans, including many Republicans, viewed corporations raising prices to make record profits as a, quote, cause of inflation. Although Democrats in Congress and President Biden have adopted a long-term plan to fight inflation that will reduce prescription drug prices and save the average family $500 per year on energy costs, certain companies instead dramatically hiked up their prices under the smokescreen of inflation. That is why, under my chairmanship, this subcommittee launched investigations this year into industries that implemented price hikes far in excess of their cost increases, all under the cover of inflation. In January, we sent letters to meat processing giants. In March, our subcommittee and the Select Subcommittee on COVID jointly sent letters to 3 of the largest shipping companies in the world. The shipping companies had 2021 profits 200 times greater than in 2019. Let me repeat that, 200 times greater than in 2019. But their average operating costs only increased by 18%. And across our entire economy, corporate net profit margins continue to hover at historic highs. We have convened this hearing so that our distinguished panel of experts can help us understand how certain companies are engaged in excessive price hikes, the economics behind these practices, and their harmful effects on American consumers. We are not here today to vilify corporations. As a former small businessman, I know that American innovation is the backbone of our economy, and many corporate leaders deserve praise for creating jobs and growth. The Inflation Reduction Act is already drawing huge new investments in American manufacturing, and the CHIPS and Science Act has led to immediate plans for new semiconductor plants. We are also not here to suggest that excessive price hikes are the sole cause of inflation. But we cannot ignore the reality that American companies today are reporting higher profit margins than ever, while increasing prices more than necessary to cover costs, all at the expense of the American consumer. And we must do everything in our power to shine a light on these practices. With that, I'd like to recognize my distinguished ranking member, Mr. Cloud, for his opening statement.